Okay, my name's Dick Pitt. We've got Paul Wimpeney. We're from Sheffield Palestine Solidarity and Stop the JNF. We've got a very distinguished panel, very impressive, I think. We're very lucky to have them. Myssana Moranay, who is based in Haifa and is from Adala. We've got Kholoud al-Ajarma, who is a stalwart of Stop the JNF. We've got Cody O'Rourke, who is, you're based in Jerusalem, and he's from the Good Shepherd Collective. The way the structure is going to be, I'm going to lead off with a few comments. We've got a very difficult job. It's a huge subject we have to do. So we're going to go through the different areas to show how the JNF and its associates work on curtailing Palestinian land and taking Palestinian land and expanding Zionist control. So I'm going to kick off with a little bit of sorry. It's a huge task we've got. I'm going to say a few words. We're looking at the 4 key areas. We're going to start with the Nakeb, go into the next one we're looking at is Galilee, then Silwan, West Bank. So after I've spoken a little bit, starting with Beersheba and the Nakeb, there'll be 3 short films that are, the first one's about Galilee, the next one's about Jerusalem. As we're going through questions, someone hasn't muted. As questions occur, there will be time for our panelists to speak and answer questions. So if anything occurs to you, please go to the chat and write down questions. So the first place we want to look at is this sign. This sign's just outside Beersheba, and as it says, God TV Forest. And this is the God TV is absolutely huge. It claims a membership viewing worldwide of 300 million. And as you see here, that it's made a donation to the Jewish National Fund of a million tree saplings. And the thing about this sign and the forest is that it takes over land that is owned by the al-Ajarma village that we featured previously. And I estimate that the last I heard that it had been flattened and rebuilt 160 times. So what do the evangelicals in America believe? The first thing is this image here. It's not a very good image. I'll explain why later. It's led by John Hagee, and he formed an organization called Christians United for Israel, and it claims, it has 7 million members in the USA. They believe that the setting up of Israel leads to the second coming of Jesus, Armageddon, and then 100 or 1,000 years of world domination, world leadership by Jesus. They're very strange, so they support everything for a stronger Israel. So they spend something like £1.5 million helping Jews to emigrate to Israel. They send volunteers to the illegal settlements in the West Bank. They send money to the illegal settlements and also huge political support. Before we formally talk about that support, I just want to say that they're very strange Christians. Christians are much more knowledgeable about this, but they're not very strong on blessed be the peacemakers. So for example, Hagee supports the idea of building a 3rd temple on the Al-Aqsa, on the area that is now occupied by the Dome on the Rock and the Al-Aqsa temple, the Al-Aqsa mosque. and you think about the conflicts that would cause. They believe in a greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. And this picture is a still from a video. This is on God TV, where Pastor Agi, who's in the middle, is joining the other two and leading a prayer to an attack, a United States attack on Iran. They're incredibly important. There's a couple of things here, items from various newspapers. The first one is that the Jews are more likely, the Jews of the US are more likely than Christians to say Trump favors the Israelis too much. This one was a news item when Trump had moved the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem for the evangelicals, and he complained that the evangelicals were more enthusiastic about his decision than Jewish people. So the next area that we want to say is to go up to Galilee. And before we touch on Galilee, we just need to look at this quote by Dane Ayalon, who was at the time the Deputy Foreign Minister. If there won't be a Jewish majority in the Negev and the Galilee, it would lay the groundwork open for a legal national claim by Arabs, either for autonomy or secession from the State of Israel. And so the various JNFs have been putting resources into Galilee. This is from their website. And the first film will show what this means in practice. And the next two films, they're very short, will take us to see what's happening in Silwan. And then we'll bring in the panelists. So if we could have the first film, Sophia.
تم هناك الاعتراف بناء على قرار حكومي، وبالتالي مؤسسات التخطيط بلشت في تحضير مخطط هيكلي للبلد.
هاي الكماني هون، وكمان هون على الجهة الثانية الكمون. الكماني موجودة قبل قيام الدولة، وكمون بنيت قبل حوالي 30 سنة. الدولة وما اعترفت بينا، تعاملوا مع الكماني على انها بلد غير معترف بها. يعني بلد غير معترف بها معناه انه ما تحصل على خدمات اساسية، لا مي ولا كهرباء ولا شيء. بالوقت اللي لما انبنت كمون قبل 30 سنة أخذوا كل الخدمات، شارع، كهرباء، مي، والسكان جيرانهم أهل الكماني ما حصلوا على أي شيء من هاي الأمور.
ما بعد الاعتراف بلشت مؤسسات التخطيط في عملية تخطيط مخطط هيكلي للبلد. الإشكالية في التخطيط الأول كانت إنه المخطط الهيكلي أخرج نصف البلد خارج المخطط الهيكلي، يعني نصف البلد كانت بناء على المخطط معدلة الهدم، وما في إمكانية إصدار تصريح بناء فيها.
فبدأنا نطالب إحنا إنه يكون لنا حقوق زينا زي سكان كمون، إنه مثل ما هم يبنوا بيوت جديدة إحنا بدنا نبنى، إنه بدنا نأخذ كهرباء، بدنا نأخذ مي، ولكن كان رفض تام من قبل الحكومة، وبالعكس طلبوا منا إنه نرحل. يعني كانوا يطالبوا منا إنه نرحل من الجبل من هون من الكماني لمواقع ثانية، وإحنا طبعا رفضنا لما في سكان جيراننا هنا، وإحنا رفضنا وقاعدين على أرضنا، وين نروح يعني؟ وين تترك أرضك اللي مسجلة بالطاب وتتركها وتروح على محل ثاني. فرفضنا. بعدين لما شافوا في إصرار من الناس إنه بدنا نظلوا بمحلاتهم، صاروا يقولوا لنا بنعمل ابعدوا عنا شوية، يعني نعمل هني بسموه حايتس مسافة معينة بين الكمانة وبين كمون. ولكن شو هاي المسافة هاي؟ على حسابنا، يعني هني بنوا قريب من بيوتنا وطلبوا منا إنه إحنا نبتعد عن 150 متر 200 متر، يكون على حساب بيوت مبنية يمكن من 70-80 سنة.
مستوطنة كمون بدهاش يكون في أغلبية عربية محاذية لها. مستوطنة كمون بدهاش شارع مشترك اللي بيوصل البلدين بين الكمانة وكمون، وبالتالي طالبوا في بناء شارع التفافي لخدمة أهالي وزائري كمون فقط. والأساس الثالث لاعتراضهم هو طبعا أنه في هناك أكم من عائلة عربية اللي ساكنين في كمون منذ زمانات الانتداب الإنجليزي، ويجب إخراجهم من مستوطنة كمون لتبقى مستوطنة يهودية محضة. السلام عليكم. اللي بيحكي عيد سواعد كيف وصلوا؟ هو عشفان. شكرا. كل شيء تمام. طب هون ليش بيقدروا يطلعوا رخاص؟
شوف الشهاد، هاي الخارطة اللي تبعت الكمانة اللي احنا قبلنا بيها، رغم انها هي ما لبت لنا كل احتياجاتنا بالكمانة. في كثير شغلات اللي كان لازم تلبيها هاي الخارطة وما لبتها، ومع ذلك قبلنا بيها. وحتى ايش نحل نحل مشاكل السكنية اللي هي مستعصية من فترة. وشوفي يعني بديش اطيل عليك بالحديث بهذا الموضوع. طلعي وين انا ساكن. انا ساكن بعدني بدار اهلي. أنا عمري صار 50 سنة وأنا بعدني ساكن بدار أهلي. أنا صار لي أكثر من 20 سنة بشتغل في موضوع قضية الكمانة، ولحد هسه مش إلي شخصيا مش قادر ألاقي حل اللي أنا أعيش بيه ودار تكون إلي أعيش بيها. ساكن عندها، يعني أنا بتخيل شو مصير أولادي لقدام.
كان جبتك علي بلاقات عمر البيت كله فقود منعونا نبني شباك. جبنا اولاد فيش تعب فيش ماشي هيك فيش تقدر تيسا ولا قضاء الا قطيع من البقر ما عنا ولا اي بدخلها. لمشاكل العرب في حلول لليهود هم يربوا واحنا نفهم بالاضعاف. بيضل لنا هالصبي قبل ما نصلي على النبي بيبارك لنا المكان. بيغيرك ببلاش زي بفلان من رومان. سأركض في بن غوريون وأصرخ لا تتركيني الله أكبر بحبك. وتاني يوم اصحيت بالسجن متهم بالإرهاب. كل ما بطلع أنا بسمع أنا بسمع يا بطلع كلام شهدك عني. كل ما بطلع أنا بسمع
طرف ثاني يجي يقول لي أعترف بيك أو ما بعترف بيك، ما أنا موجود. شو هالمصطلح الغريب هذا؟
In the last 10 years, there has been a significant rise in archaeological activities in Jerusalem's historic basin. Antiquity sites are a central part in the political struggle over Jerusalem, and particularly in the area surrounding the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif. The main organizations involved in Judaizing the area through the use of archaeology are the al-Ad Foundation, the Western Wall Heritage Foundation, and the Nature and Parks Authority. El-Ad is promoting a Jewish settlement in the Palestinian neighborhood of Silwan and is operating archaeological tourism sites in the City of David, the Old City, and in the Mount of Olives. The Western Wall Heritage Foundation is responsible for the Western Wall Plaza and the Western Wall tunnels which run under the Muslim Quarter. The Nature and Parks Authority is responsible for the Jerusalem Walls National Park. The Israel Antiquities Authority carries out the excavations that are funded by the Elad Foundation and the Western Wall Heritage Foundation. The Kedem Center in Silwan is a visitor center the size of a mall, which Elad is planning to build across from the old city walls, on top of antiquities discovered at the site. The Davidson Center is an archaeological park situated at the foot of the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif along its southwestern wall. Elad is engaged in a legal battle to receive the rights to manage the park. The Western Wall Heritage Foundation has built the Strauss Building in the Western Wall Plaza, which houses toilets and offices, and is advancing a plan to build the Halibah Building, which will house an educational center and bar mitzvah halls. The Western Wall Heritage Foundation receives funding from the Prime Minister's office. It is expanding the Western Wall tunnels to include more and more areas under the Muslim Quarter. The Western Wall tunnels surround the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif from the west and the north and are presented to the public as sites of great religious significance for Jewish history. But at the same time, they make almost no mention of Jerusalem's multicultural history. Bab el-Rahmeh is an active Muslim cemetery located in the area of the Jerusalem Walls National Park. Recently, the Nature and Parks Authority has begun to fence it off and prevent burials at the site. At the Mount of Olives Cemetery, the Elad Foundation is Operators Center as part of its attempt to consolidate Jewish tourism in the area surrounding the Temple Mount. All this directly affects the status quo at the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. The way to the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif is surrounded by settlers and ancient sites which emphasize the Jewish connection to Jerusalem while almost completely ignoring the presence of other nations and cultures in the city or their connections to these historic sites. The Haram al-Sharif is more isolated than ever before. All this contributes to the increased tensions and violence in Jerusalem. The idea that in Jerusalem it is possible to present one historical story while erasing other narratives is immoral and endangers the future of the city and the area as a whole.
وادي حلوة بسلوان مسكن 5000 فلسطيني. في بداية التسعينات بلشوا المستوطنين يستولوا على بيوت الحارة. عائلات كثيرة تشردت من بيوتها، دخلوا محلهم المستوطنين واستعملوا أساليب كثيرة للسيطرة على العقارات. بيت دار العباسي كان من أول البيوت اللي استولى عليها المستوطنين. احتلوا معظم البيت بعد ما صنفوه وكأنه حارس املاك غائب. دار الحجة حمدة كمان صنف على انه حارس املاك غائبين، وملكيته تحولت للكرنكيمة صندوق القومي اليهودي، وتسلم برضو للمستوطنين. دار غزلان دافعوا عن بيتهم 20 سنة، بس بالآخر أخذوه. كان الكرنكيمة بتحكم إنه الأرض المقام عليها الدار اشتراها واحد يهودي قبل 48. دار عجلوني أخذوها عن طريق سمسار فلسطيني. وهاي دار ستي أخذوها قبل 15 سنة. الوثائق فبركها واحد فلسطيني بعد تقسيمها على مغسل الموتى. تصور إنك ما بعت بيتك وبس بتشوفه من بعيد. بيت دار عطلة مش قادرين نفهم حتى اليوم كيف يتصرف المستوطنين. هالحين دور دار سمورين، البيت اللي بنوه قبل الاحتلال وسكنوا فيه طول حياتهم. الكرنكيمة بدهم يخلوهم منه على أساس إنه حارس أملاك لاعبين. إدارة جديدة في وادي حلوة راح نشوفها بس من برا.
Okay, that's pretty solemn stuff, actually. I was going to start off with Myssana and just say that when people think of the JNF, they probably imagine it as something separate from the State of Israel, but obviously that's not the case. And Adala challenged the right of the JNF to have such heavy representation in the Israel Land Council. So can you explain why you took up the case and what the result of it was?
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're hearing me loud enough, or should I speak louder? Okay, good.
That's better now, yeah.
Yeah, good. So for your question, Paul, well, the JNF has a big role in the land regime in Israel. So just let me explain a little bit about the land regime and in Israel and how it's built. So with different legal tools that confiscated the land or consider them to be, as we see in the video a few minutes ago, absentee properties, almost 93% of the land of Israel is now they considered to be Israel lands, lands that are owned by the state, by the state of Israel, by the Development Authority, which is a body that mainly have control over the refugees and the internally displaced people property, and of the JNF. These lands together are considered to, under the name of the Israel lands, are managed and by the Israel Land Authority, the ILA. Which is basically is having monopole all over percentage of the land, and also have a major role in the planning systems. So, and taking these two aspects together will lead us to the conclusion that actually the ILA is responsible for all the land allocation, for all the land policies, and which affect every aspect of the people's life. And in this ILA, Israel Land Authority Council, the body that decide all the policies and make the big and important decisions, the JNF have 6 out of 13 members in this body, really high representation, even taking into consideration that eventually the JNF have control over some of or own some of the land that the ILA direct or manage. They only يعني own 13% of the registered land, but their percentage in the council is 43%, and which clearly will affect the way that the decisions are made in the ILA and the land allocation and the land policies, and clearly taking into consideration the constitution of the JNF and the role and the values of the JNF, and the fact that it sees itself as a trustee for the benefit of the Jewish people only. It's clearly how their presence there is affecting the land allocation and how it's affecting the Arab citizens and their rights. يعني the JNF is not actually is not the only body يعني out يعني but body that is not part of the state from one side, but have a huge role in the land allocation and all the building the villages and the planning system. You have, in addition to the JNF, the other Zionist bodies like the World Zionist Organization and the settlement division of WEZO that have a huge role now. And now I think 2 or 3 years they were given more authorities also in the planning and the allocation of land inside the Green Line. And so these bodies have they are not part of the state officially, but they are acting as actually as the long arm of the state in many different aspects. You're mute.
What was the result of the case in the end?
Yeah, so our main claim and argument in the court was that this is the representation is really high, and because of the nature of the JNF as a discriminatory body, it will affect the land allocation and in a way that is affecting the right to equality and the right to dignity. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court didn't agree that the JNF they asked to give proof that the representatives of the JNF in specific cases or in specific decisions were thinking about their own benefit and not and to prove it by in each decision, which is clearly not a thing that can be done. It's for us, it's enough that you have a body that by its merit is and by its value, it's discriminatory to be enough for banning this method or this representation. But the Supreme Court was not was not convinced and asked for specific cases that show that they were not acting correctly.
Okay, we saw your colleague Suhara there in the film driving out there, but clearly often you take the case into the courtroom. And how do you see the advantages and disadvantages of actually challenging the Israeli legal system on its own terms?
So yeah, I think we in Adala as a legal center believe that there is a huge role for the law and for the legal advocacy in changing or affecting the life of the people, and also in challenging the discourse and challenging the regime and the political situation. We are clearly aware of the limitation of this tool, and because of that, it's not يعني we take that in consideration also when we choose our cases. Sometimes, for example, that the case, يعني in addition to this petition, we had also a petition against the authority of the settlement division in the way of the Wezo and giving them more authorities. It was clear for us, and we believe our legal argument and legal analysis, but it was clear for us that there is no judge in the Supreme Court that will cancel the law on this basis. But we still did that in order, went to the court in order to make it clear and to challenge them and to challenge also the court, but also the regime to make clear statements also that the situation is not correct and it's not and can't continue, and to say that the regime is and even the court are approving the situation as it is. And actually in يعني maybe in cases related to land and cases related to the nature of the regime, the legal tools are يعني maybe a little bit less effective than other cases, but also the legal tools can bring changes. For example, with the legal tools, we managed to open clinics in the unrecognized villages in al-Naqab and to open schools and and giving the people a little bit more a better conditions of living.
In the UK, Myssana, the JNF claims that the Naqab is not a politically sensitive area. There's no problem there, and therefore its work is just ecological or humanitarian or whatever it is. So obviously we've seen a little bit of evidence that that's not the case. How would you comment on that?
I wouldn't call the threat to force displace 80,000 people, billion Palestinian people, as a matter that is not sensitive politically. But it's a matter of who you see. So for the JNF, they see the trees and the environment, and they choose not to see the people and their rights. So if you ignore the people, so you may say it's not sensitive politically, but the situation in al-Naqab is highly sensitive, and the people there are living under a threat of forced displacement and for years, and this is continuing. And actually the JNF in different roles are taking part in the threat, involved in the threat that is being opposed on some of the villages. For example, lately, in the last few months, the JNF, not as a landowner, but as a constructor of the ILA, they were planting trees next to Khirbat al-Watan village, and by this the people are facing the threat of being displaced because of the trees, and planting the trees not as a forest but as a tool to prevent trespassers means the Bedouin community from entering the land that the state claims that it owns.
On your website, obviously you mention all kinds of campaigns that you've been involved with, and which ones give you the most satisfaction that you've had some success?
Actually, the case of al-Hiran is one of the campaigns that for me personally it's one of the cases that really affected me, and I'm really relating to that and proud, even though the result at the end was not the best result. We didn't succeed legally to keep the people in their lands, but the legal struggle give us the tool to tell the story of the people, to give them voice. Instead of being trespassers, we managed to prove through the court and the documents that you found in the archives that they were not trespassers. Even according to the Israeli legal terms, they were not trespassers. And we managed to write their story and to tell their story and to help them يعني tell their story to others. And it's a case that was in the court for 14 years, and in the end of the case 2-3 years ago, there was no Palestinian or even Israeli that didn't know about al-Ajarma, or what is al-Ajarma, where is al-Ajarma, and what is the situation. So yeah, I think if we think about the legal tools as in a wider picture, it was a tool that helped the people to stay in their land for additional 14 years and to tell their story the way they see it and the way they want to tell it. And for me, this is one of the main cases of Adala that I'm really proud of it, and actually of the great work also done by my colleague Suhad Bshara that we saw in the video, that was the main lawyer that accompanied the people for 14 years.
Thanks for the time being, Myssana. And obviously to us, it seems Adala does a fantastic job. And we're really pleased and privileged that you were able to speak for us today. And I hope you might answer a question or two later on. Thank you so much. Okay, if I can turn to Cody and ask your organisation, Cody. I don't know how well known it is, but I was just wanting you to explain what the Good Shepherd Collective is and does, what it's involved with.
He's mute.
Right.
Tell him he's mute.
You're mute at the minute, Cody.
Sorry. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. So the Good Shepherd Collective is a relatively new sort of structure that was put in place about 2017, beginning of 2018. That was really put together to allow different villages to engage in some of their own communication and advocacy to raise awareness, rather than having their voices maybe sometimes curtailed through other NGOs or through the media, for example. We're primarily based out of South Hebron Hills, so we work with the communities of al-Khair, Susia, and Atwani primarily.
Okay, now we were going to talk to you about Regavim, Cody, as you know, and you've written a bit about them, and they seem to perform the same intelligence gathering work that the JNF did before 1948. Is that an accurate reflection of what they do?
Yeah, they're definitely doing a lot of real-time, collection on the ground, not only just in terms of Palestinian development on their own lands, both in the West Bank and inside of areas like in the Galilee and the Negev, other places in northern Israel, for example. Using their own drones, their own mapping system, giving this back to the JNF to, as what Myssana had pointed out, to allow Israel to kind of develop their own policies that favor this project of settler colonialism, but they're also engaging on an international level in terms of for example, having EU briefings come in and show these different areas of Palestinian development and try to get the EU to stop developing these areas. And what you see is, you can see how they kind of use this language of human rights, but really, it's wrapped up with all of this fascism and nationalism and right-wing propaganda. That I think that what they do is they're a very nice complement to the JNF. whereas, you know, the JNF still kind of caters to some of these, you know, liberal Zionists, for example. Whereas, you know, the, you know, Regavim, they can take a much more hard stance of claiming that all of this land is ours, what the Palestinians doing are wrong, they don't belong here, and really have a much more right-wing narrative. And so really what the JNF does is it kind of partners with Regavim so it can have the best of both worlds, both the liberal Zionists and the hardcore settlers.
Yeah, that's very much the flavor you get from their website, that they see themselves as preventing Jews from being robbed of their lands. So clearly they don't seem to think Palestinians have any right to any of it. Is that
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, that's definitely the narrative that they put out there. You know, they're an organization whose individuals even operate outside of the realm of Israeli law. So, for example, a lot of the people who work for Regavim actually live in illegal outposts, even by, you know, Israel standards. You know, again, like I was saying, you know, they cater to not even just like the settler movement, but just fascist right-wing people inside of Israel. One of their, you know, original kind of like founders, Bezalel Smotrich, who's actually in the Israeli Knesset now. In 2006, when they had the Pride Parade in Jerusalem, you know, he called it the Beast Parade. You know, so in a way, it's not even just about. It's not. Regavim carries out this political narrative that isn't just about, you know, Palestinian rights or Arab rights. You know, it's also against anything that's kind of progressive. So it's this kind of this reactionary type movement, you know, that you see popping up everywhere, like in the United States with the, you know, all the folks that are supporting Trump.
Right. Were Regavim involved in the Kassiev family loss of their home and the restaurant, or was that Himenuta? Did they work together ever?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard exactly to say to what extent that they work together. We know that, you know, they share lawyers, which isn't uncommon, either in the right-wing movement or the left-wing movement. You know, we definitely know that in various ways, you know, they definitely support the propaganda and drum up, you know, the political willpower for Israeli judges, for example, to rule in favor of the, you know, the settler movement. So we do know that in the Kassiev family case, that one of the lawyers who took the case also works for Regavim. Yeah.
Okay, Cody, last one for now. Most of the people watching this are obviously outside Palestine, and they're interested enough to want to try and do something about it. So, and to combat what the KKL, JNF, and their associates are doing. So, how would you? What would your message to people in England and in other places be on that score?
Well, I think that's one of the things that the Good Shepherd Collective has been trying to put forward. Is thinking about how these campaigns can lead to a change in the law. So, for example, you know, in the United States, these organizations like the Jerusalem or the Jewish National Fund and Regavim, you know, they exploit the use of law in order to fund their operations. Okay. Now, if you can change the law so these millions of dollars, you know, stop coming in, you know, that's a long-term sustainable change, right? If we take these campaigns and simply ask for an executive director to change a policy inside of an institution, that's not necessarily sustainable. So a good example of that was this recent campaign with Airbnb, right? So the campaign was all set up to get the executive board of the Airbnb to change their minds, to stop listing homes that were, you know, built in the settlements, built on, stolen land of the Palestinians. And so Airbnb said, okay, like fine, like we won't do that. And then there was a backlash from like the Zionist organizations and Christian institutions. And then, a month later, Airbnb reversed their decision. So, that's not a sustainable change, right? We have to think about how do we actually change the laws and shut off these loopholes. And I think one of the things that when we talk about these laws, that it's not just the JNF that's exploiting these laws, or Regabim that's exploiting these laws to push out the indigenous people here in Palestine, right? It's all of these far-right organizations inside of the United States and other hate groups inside of the UK that have found these loopholes to fund this whole structure. So in very real ways, challenging the grotesque ways that these laws are operating, it then becomes not just about Palestinian rights, but about all of our, LGBTQ rights and et cetera, in the UK, in Australia, and in Canada, and the United States. So it's thinking about how these laws are interconnected and really focusing on that in their own communities.
Right, thanks Cody for now, and I may come back to you in a few minutes. Thanks for that. Okay.
Yep.
Right, Kholoud's turn. So, hello, Kholoud. Nice to see you, and nice to know you well. So I know that your studies have taken you to Europe, South America, North Africa, and you've just seen some film of the Galilee and the Nakab and East Jerusalem. So how many of those places were you familiar with? Have you been to the Galilee?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. You might have heard me say this before, Paul, when we met in the UK, that when I went to the UK the first time, I said that it was easier getting all the way to the UK than going to Jerusalem, which is less than half an hour walk from my house, literally. And that goes for almost everywhere in historic Palestine, where it is almost impossible to go anywhere apart from places where we're allowed as Palestinians. And then we need the special permits from the Israeli authorities to be able to cross into Jerusalem or other areas. So in the past 30 years of my life, I've never been to the Galilee. It's been a dream of mine. But yeah, it is literally easier to go anywhere than to go to areas of occupied Palestine. And that is the system that the Israeli occupation has created over the years. And I think if we are to visit those places, the knowledge of how the situation is becomes better. Our solidarity as Palestinians together and the solidarity we can build around these issues becomes stronger. And that is what the Israeli occupation is trying to put forward, is that we are not even able to meet people from these areas, to listen to them, to know about their struggles and so on. Like, I know about what's happening in Silwan, but most what I know is through social media, through printed media and so on. But not even Silwan I've been able to go to. So these restrictions that are on Palestinians make it really hard to actually go to these places and experience them for firsthand.
Obviously, I thought as much, but there you go. Now we know that the JNF was involved in taking your family's land, actually, as personal as that, in al-Ajarma. And now you've seen films showing that they're still at it. The Nakba is ongoing, so obviously that connects with your family's experience as well.
Absolutely. The work of the JNF and its ongoing stealing, let's say, of Palestinian lands have never stopped, not even before it started before 1948, and it carried on with the lands that were occupied in 1948 and 67 and so on. So my family's land in Ajur and the whole of Ajur village lies today under what is called the British Park, because they claim that the JNF UK has raised funds to turn it into a leisure park. Whereas if you go there, you can still see the ruins of the people's houses who once lived there. You can see cactus trees and olive trees, which are the native trees to the land, versus the trees that were planted on top to cover what was stolen. And that is what the JNF continues to do today. So they plant these trees that are not native to the land, these trees that grow fast, but to hide the ruins of what lies underneath. And I think it was David Ben-Gurion who wrote in his diary that he wanted the JNF to create parks that reminded him of Switzerland. And the thing is, Palestine is not Switzerland, and we are a Mediterranean country. We have our own vegetation and so on. So the JNF also doesn't only like portray itself as an environmental organization, but it's the wrong type of environmentalism. Those who work with environmental issues would know that if you work in an area, you have to make sure you plant things, for example, that are suitable for the climate and so on, which none of that the JNF does. And what it does today, it really a continuation of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from wherever they are, whether that is Area C, the Negev, the Galilee, Ajur, everywhere, really.
Thanks for that. Now, as we said, you've been able to travel in these last few years, but each time you go home, obviously you go home as a slightly different person with those new experiences, and amongst Palestinians who can't travel, can't build, can't depend on clean water and so on and so on. How does that affect you as a young woman, a young Palestinian activist?
Actually, it goes both ways. When I'm out of Palestine, I'm always torn to that like longing to Palestine and the kinds of family gatherings and the land and so on. But also when I'm out of Palestine, there's always people that I meet that either don't know about the situation or support Israel, or they just think that the conflict is so easy to solve. They sometimes want to tell me how to solve it, stuff like that. But then when I return to Palestine, sometimes it feels like living in a vicious circle, because every time I go back, literally the situation is worse. The brutality of the Israeli occupation is worse. The checkpoints, even the looks of the checkpoints become more and more like, I would see more soldiers than the time I've been on a checkpoint before. The land confiscation is still ongoing. To see the wall, to go through the checkpoints, to visit friends in areas where they are not allowed to build and so on. So all these kinds of things affect not only like my sense of being a Palestinian, but also my sense of human rights, and that this is not supposed to be the situation. I'm not supposed to, like, in a normal situation, I shouldn't worry about water cuts. I shouldn't worry about night invasions. I shouldn't worry about children inhaling tear gas all the time, which is literally a daily reality, for example, in Aida camp, where my family lives. So all these kinds of human rights violations, being able to go out and see a different or a possible different life, makes it even harder to come back to Palestine and see the everyday injustice that we have to go through.
Thanks for that. And as you know, what we're concerned with is tackling the charitable status of the JNF UK. We can't believe that that's entitled to be a charity. Are Palestinians aware of the sort of distinctions we're making between the JNF, Regavim, Himanuta, Elad? Are Palestinians aware in this way, or do they just think of it in terms of the Israeli state going about its business?
I think there are two groups, maybe I can put it that way. A smaller group who would definitely know the differences between all these organizations and the names of these organizations, and specifically if they've dealt with them. So for example, people who are under threat of evacuation, people in Area C and so on, would have dealt with some of these bodies. But at the same time, there are people who would see them as the Israeli state being an apartheid colonial state, basically. And I think that is, like, when we think about it, the question is really, why is it so? And I think part of it is the whole apartheid system that Israel has built that makes it really hard for Palestinians to sit and kind of think about all these names and all these organizations, because if like there are so many worries in the everyday life of a Palestinian, including like to get a monthly salary at the end of the month. Am I going to get my kids food at the end of the day? Am I going to get them their school uniform? Is the checkpoint going to be easy to pass today or not? You know, all these kinds of worries that the state, the occupation has put us under, and also the fragmented Palestinian Authority as well, I'm afraid, makes it really hard for Palestinians to focus on issues that has to do with the resistance and knowing all these organizations in order to know how to resist them, whether that illegally or otherwise. So I think, yeah, I think there are two groups of people in to answer your question, but I think it's really important to ask also, why is it that people don't really know about all these organizations? And also because the Israeli occupation has so many of these organizations that it's also like a very big web that is very difficult to kind of tackle. So people would know JNF, they would know the Land Authority, but they wouldn't know many of these smaller organizations that are kind of like cancer going around stealing more lands and so on.
Thanks for these very practical examples, Kholoud, that obviously bases this whole big picture in the lives of people. One life, sadly, that we noticed through our media, through Electronic Intifada, to be honest, is Daoud Talal al-Khatib that we read about. Now that shocked us, that he was 45, he had 18 years in Offa prison. So would his death be well known now in Palestine, and what would the reaction be?
Yeah, I think when I spoke to my family, for example, there's a lot of anger on the streets. People are very sad about his story, and of course there's a lot of solidarity towards him and his family. But at the end of the day, it's also very difficult for people to show solidarity nowadays. There's a system of collective punishment that the Israeli occupation applies if people, for example, go out to demonstrate, if people, for example, voice their opinions about these issues. So it's, in general, there is a lot of anger, but because of the situation and because of the lockdown and so on, it is very hard to voice it at the minute.
Well, we've talked about the continuing nature of the Nakba, but we should also talk, people like the three of you, the continuing nature of the opposition to it and of the resistance to it. We obviously we hope to support you in that, but we note it, and we insist that it's there. Okay, now we've got some questions that I'll put to all three of you, if that's okay, and then somebody jump in. Somebody's asked, where are the al-Ajarma families now? Myssana, do you know?
Yes. So basically, in 2015, there was the decision. Okay, now better. In 2015, there was the decision of the Supreme Court that allows the eviction of the people. Later, there was one incident where the police entered the village in order to demolish some houses and kill Yaqub Abu al-Qayyan, and later on claimed that he was an ISIS member that tried to kill a policeman, ignoring that the fact that he was shot by the police and thus the car just happened to hit the policeman. After that, there was a huge pressure put on the people by the police, by a lot of bodies from the state that eventually lead to a situation that the people signed some kind of agreement to move to Hura. For us, for us, it's clear it's not an agreement that is based on free choice or in understanding what are the terms, because the people also didn't have any copy of that agreement. So the agreement said that they will move to Hura, the township, the nearby township that the state built to concentrate the Bedouin in. But it wasn't, the tragedy doesn't end there even. So some of the families moved. Later on, there was a petition against the agreement with the people, and the state again said that the agreement that they withdrew from the agreement because it was done without authority, and canceled the agreement. So some of the people are already moved to Hura, others were in the process, and others are still in the village of al-Hiran, and now the state just canceled, and Israel just canceled the agreement with the people that will give them some kind of solution in Hura, and they are again nomads with no, because of the policies of the Israel imposing on them.
Someone's put a specific question, again it's for you I'm afraid, Myssana, about whether Adala has challenged the ethnic cleansing of the Bedouin on the basis that it is a constituent element of genocide. And genocide is a crime against humanity, and I'm sure you know better than me. And I wonder if that's ever occurred to you as part of your tactics in challenging what's happening to the Bedouin in the Nakab.
We're more working in the domestic level of litigation. So in the Israeli courts, we normally challenge the forced displacement of the people, whether it's bills or laws that are trying to affect a lot of people, or whether it's even in the level of each village that is facing the threat of being evicted. But again, according to the Israeli system and laws, the people are trespassers and thus have no rights in the land. And as for the Israeli and the Zionist narrative, the state is bringing them modern life and facilities and just doing them a good favor in moving them to a more modern lifestyle in the townships that they are building. So this is the narrative that we're dealing with, but we're continuing to challenge the acts of the forced displacement, whether the legality of the forced displacement, of the argument of discrimination and segregation, and trying to defend the rights of the people in each case that get to the court, but also taking into consideration that most of the time in these cases we're reacting to the state's policies, not initiating any procedures, because this may have a huge effect on the people.
Thank you. One for Cody here. Cody, it says all the films, somebody has asked, all the films show separate development, segregation, and the use of the word apartheid obviously comes to us to describe that kind of thing. And somebody is wondering, do the citizens of Israel know this is the case, that it's a word used outside? And if they do know, is it something that bothers them?
That's for me?
That's for you, Cody, yeah. Manya,
yeah, I mean, I think for, there are people who are, understand maybe a little bit what apartheid is. I think for the average Israeli, they don't care, what the outside, world necessarily thinks. It's for them. It's, I think, the same thing, kind of what like Kholoud was talking about the average Palestinian. It's about life and how are you going to pay your bills and what are you doing with your kids, and but I think that there's another layer of it when we stop thinking about like just that intuitive part of whether or not people, how they understand apartheid to be working. There's also this layer of, I think that sometimes that's within inside of the Israeli mentality, that it's us against the world. Of course people would say we're running an apartheid regime, right? Because of a long history of anti-Semitism towards the Jewish people, but in other ways in which that anti-Semitism has also been weaponized in a way to legitimize Israel's policies. I think for us, what the Good Shepherd Collective does is just, I think what Kholoud pointed out is the different ways in which Palestinians are oppressed, and they really kind of speak for themselves. So for us, I think that's kind of the power of it is that when you list off the daily lives of Palestinians, this picture of apartheid kind of emerges for itself and speaks for itself. And like what she talked about, she grew up in the Ida camp where there's almost daily tear gassings, right? Like the average person hears that and goes, wow, that you really can't defend children being tear gassed in their own homes.
Cody, while we've got you, there's a question directed directly to you about al-Khair. Are there any cases of COVID there? And are people able to work? How are they surviving? Obviously, this is from Linda, so you'll have to thump her one next time you see her, Cody. How are are they being harassed by nearby settlers and so on and so on? She's interested in al-Khair.
Yeah, I mean, recently there was a scare in al-Khair because one of the people had been in contact with someone who had tested positive, for COVID through their work. Some of the guys are working, but a lot of them, are not working. Several of the guys, they were working for NGOs, and because of different budget cuts, they're not working. So it's kind of the same situation. Whereas, these small, vulnerable communities, they're really hit hard because there's not money there to help, sustain people. So yeah, I mean, out there it's very difficult. And as people know, like communities like al-Khair, which has like a strong international network, that community, will get like 1,000 or maybe 2,000 visitors a year when there's this tourism that's going on. And so, that small little community has literally lost like tens of thousands of dollars this year because of how much money, comes of, people scheduling talks or staying the night, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so they're really trying to like make this adjustment of, how do we raise money and sustain ourselves now with, the loss of this income.
Okay. Sorry, Kholoud, I muted the microphone. Could we ask you how prepared you might be for another one idea? We've had other ideas about challenging the JNF in the UK, ideas about perhaps class action. We've also had a question from Mick in Scotland about the French and the German courts have been only too ready to move on quite rightly, trying to recover the property of Jewish people that was taken by the Nazis in the war and so on. Palestinians might well be interested in that, in saying, as of your family, that that their property has been expropriated from them. So have you got some fight left? For people that don't know, Kholoud was already involved in one challenge to the Charity Commission. Do you see yourself continuing that work in the future?
Well, as long as there is a possibility to challenge it further, I will always be on the challenging side, because I think justice is on our side, and hopefully that with the development of new rulings and new laws and more just regimes around, hopefully there will be a solution. And I think challenging the JNF UK is one step. And before we started the challenge to the JNF UK, I was 100% sure that we will win, because I'm 100% sure about the justice of our case. But unfortunately, political issues got involved, and you've been involved in it, and so you know the backstory. But the point is that as long as there is a path to go for to do more to challenge the JNF UK in general, but also anything that would get the right of return for any Palestinian, I'm always on board. And I'm sure Myssana and Cody are as well.
Okay, well, we've now, I think before today, or before the other day, you didn't know Myssana, and now you know a lawyer. So there's some expertise available that may not have been available before. Okay, we've had requests for Dick about who made the films. We'll put that on the website, Dick. Yeah, you'll point that out. Dick's going to finish up in a moment. We've had a question about the 93% of the land which is state land, and is that all absentee property, or how does that work? Perhaps.
Yes. So no, not all of it are absentee properties. So these 93% are part of the JNF land, as I said. Others are the lands of the development authority. This is the body that actually the absentee property, or the custodian of the absentee property, took the land and gave them to this development authority. So all the land of the refugees and internally displaced people are part of these 93%, but they are not all of that. You have also the JNF and what is considered to be state land that was confiscated from the Palestinian who stayed inside Israel, land that, as in a Naqab, that the state claims that it belongs to no one, and thus it's a state land. So no, not all the 93%.
Okay, I'm reminded that on our second webinar, there's a film that explains some of this. Okay, Dick's going to finish off in a moment. With you three have been fantastic, but we don't want to outstay our welcome. Just before we finish, is there anything any of you want to say that you wish we'd asked, or you wish you'd said? I'm just giving you an opportunity to say if there is or not. Anybody? No. Okay, right. Over to Dick, and really thank you. You three are fantastic. Thank you very much. Over to Dick.
Thank you very much. Have I got the volume right now? Is that
great?
Better?
Yeah.
I apologise very much. We like to finish off with these things. Before I thank the panelists, we from Stop the JNF have got three things that we want our audience to do. And that is, the first one is organisation. Please join an organisation. Obviously, we want you to join Stop the JNF, but if you've joined Palestine Solidarity, Scottish Palestine Solidarity, al-Ajarma, whatever, a lot of our audience probably will have. If you don't, you won't get the information on what's happening. If you have already, and you're members of other organisations, trade unions, churches, etc., please take these ideas into those organisations. There's a minority that know what's going on, and our job's to get it to the majority. The second thing is the summering campaign. Right this point in time, there's a gap between two court judgments. The final appeal is coming up, and we have a window of opportunity to publicize what is happening in Salwan, and in particular to the Sumarin family, although it affects a whole string of others. So you can raise the early day motion 529, get onto your MP to actually take action. And there are other things that we are planning over the Sumarin campaign. So please keep an eye on that. The third and final thing, almost final thing, is there's a whole mass of actions against individual campaigns against HSBC and the arms trade and getting weapons to Israel. The Puma campaign, Elbit, of course, which supplies weaponry, and I've left one off. JCB. JCB supplies the diggers that destroy Palestinian things. So taking part in those campaigns, you'll meet new people and spread the campaigns. So finally, I'd like to thank our three, to me, very, very impressive speakers, and I'd like to thank Paul Wimpeney for his competence. And finally, I'd thank everyone that's listened in, and hope you found it impressive, and keep an eye out for the coming one in a month's time. So thank you very much for everybody.
Well done, Dick.
I got it right this time.